Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Heretics Corner. I'm Obaid, and with me, as always, are Nulli
Hi.
and Dean.
Hey guys.
And today we have a really special guest. It's Nikki. You can find her on Twitter as at Skeptic Nikki, and she tweets out a lot of great stuff. Usually makes me laugh. Hi, Nikki. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Am I being too quiet? Should I speak up?
No, not at all.
Oh, good. I feel quiet.
No, please. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, your story, and we can take it from there.
Okay, so first, thanks so much for having me. You guys are really awesome. I've had fun getting to know you so far. My story pretty much is I was raised evangelical Christian to very strict parents who have some very heavily ingrained views about Christianity, mainly the evangelical Christian way of thinking, brimstone, fire, we're the way, truth and light, no one else, creationists, young earth creationists, and they still believe this to this day. But somehow I got out of it. Not sure how. Growing up in Knoxville, Tennessee, it's the South, and you don't really have many options. You're either a Christian or a Christian, so you don't really have many options to be much else. And so I don't know. Went to Christian church school my whole life, except for about 3 years of public school, and then everything kind of felt odd. I felt people's behavior was a little weird, but I guess I tried to conform because it was easiest, and plus every life lesson my parents gave us came alongside some Bible verse, so I couldn't really get away from this at all. But eventually I went to college, started questioning, and became like Yoruba, and started seeing spirits and weird, crazy stuff. I thought I was losing my mind, so I don't know. But eventually I just realized it's all kind of relative, and that no one really knows what's going on, and that God is an invention by humans, and for various reasons, and that the stories that I was raised to believe are not true. And that was upsetting for me. And I've had some conversations with my mother where she admits she can't prove the stories she believes, but they're real for her. But she made these decisions my whole life, affecting me and my siblings and how we interpret the world, how we fit into the world and see ourselves based on this belief. And that's upsetting for me. And I know a lot of people do that, and they affect other people's lives, but have no evidence for what they believe, and they refuse to even question it because they find some odd comfort in it. So that's what's motivated me to speak out against it, because I see it every day and no one really understands it. They're trying to get something out of it that's functional, but the way they're going about it isn't functional. And religion must serve some purpose because it's so ubiquitous, but whatever that purpose is, we can separate it from religion and get rid of the false ways of thinking and false beliefs about the world. So now I'm an outspoken atheist, and I'm trying to get off Twitter and do something a little bit more, effective. But I plan on doing some bigger, badder, better things here down the road. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's
So
that's the unfortunate thing with Twitter. It's like a black hole for life. Twitter.
It is.
It's like light can't escape a black hole. Life can't explain Twitter. Escape Twitter.
So a lot of our viewers, and all three of us are ex-Muslim. I know a bit about evangelical Christians because my partner was raised as an Orthodox Christian, but he loved the TV and whatever they're called. He was like, they are the most, he's like, they're like inspiring and this and that, and like that's who he used to aspire to be like. So would you mind giving us a bit more information about what exactly is an evangelical Christian? Like, could you go maybe a bit more in depth?
So I can tell you how the church was that I grew up in, and basically what my interpretation and understanding of it was based on how I was raised. And this was based on my parents' understanding and their interpretation, because even within the church, they did not agree with or do things the same as others. But the overlapping ideals are belief in the triune, belief in God the Father and this Holy Spirit as one, but three separate almost personalities or identities of a God. So he's almost like three properties, like ice, water, and gas, if that makes sense. So that's their belief. They baptize. The whole objective of evangelical is to just spread the word, to evangelize, pretty much. And that was the goal of the church that I went to. I had participated in evangelical attempts at Kroger with the little youth group, standing outside giving weird ladies buying a ton of garden stakes at one time. These weird little pamphlets. And I saw this lady, she was this old kind of cat lady looking, just kind of, obviously she wasn't a social woman, and she was buying 20 tomato garden stakes at one time. And I was like, okay, maybe that's fine. But it looked odd. And I just handed her a pamphlet, and she was like, oh, I'm Wiccan. And I was just like, oh, okay. I don't know what that means. So I went up to one of the girls and I was like, that lady said she was Wiccan. What is that? And that girl looked at me and she was looked around and she looked at that lady and she said, she's a witch. And I was just like, oh, no. Well, no, and it was basically the objective was to just convert everyone to follow your way of thinking. Evangelize is pretty much the goal. If that answers, it's kind of an overview.
Yeah, just a little thing on the evangelicals. I grew up in Canada, went to the States a lot. I mean, living in Canada, it's basically you get American culture, right? But I always had for me, it was a little fuzzy. You have the Baptists, you have the evangelicals, you have Pentecostals. I mean, it all kind of fits under the Protestant tent. Yeah. But I mean, you can have, Baptists who are also evangelicals, right? Is evangelical? I mean, I know to evangelize is to go out and spread the gospel, spread the good word, right? But is there a there is Baptist? Is there a separate denomination that's evangelical and a Baptist that's evangelizing? Is that different than an evangelical? If you understand what I'm trying to say.
No, I understand exactly what you're saying. My parents would say they are non-denominational, but they follow evangelical. The church was evangelical. It was an evangelical church. Their main focus was evangelizing, taking the word out. Evangelical is more of a mindset, and the way evangelicals are basically representing themselves in the media is the way evangelicals basically the ideas that they represent, the mega churches, the Billy Grahams, the Kenneth Copelands, these types of individuals, these were the center of these churches. So they identified as non-denominational, if that makes sense. They weren't Baptist per se, but trust me, they had some things to say about the Baptists. They had some things to say about the Baptists. But yes, George Bush, there was a picture of George Bush down in the basement next to the air hockey table. And I'm just like, okay, well, maybe he'll give my game some power.
When you were growing up, I mean, you said you went to a Christian school.
Yes.
Now, was that a Christian school? Because in Canada, again, you had the Catholic School Board, which is a public school system, but it was principally for Catholics. And then you had the Protestant School Board, which was for everyone else. Right? So you would have Jews and Muslims and Hindus. And then there was also a smaller separate Jewish school board in Montreal. But so was it actually was it a public school, was it a public school with a religious undertone, or was it run by a church? Was it a private school?
It was a private school run by a church. It was a private school run by a church.
So did you when you were in the school, when you were growing up, and I understand, from visiting the South, obviously visiting and living are two different things, but did you were all your friends extremely religious, or the one that you differentiated between the ones that ate meat on Friday and the ones that didn't, even though that's a Catholic thing, but whatever. I mean,
I understand. Yeah. So the church that I went to, ironically enough, was an apostolic church. Not the church, I'm sorry, the school. The church that ran the school. I'm sorry, I need to correct myself. The church that ran the school that we went to was an apostolic church. So based on my understanding of apostolic doctrine or apostolic practices, the people who were religious were the ones who best followed those practices, even when we were not at school. if that makes sense. So people had varying degrees of religiosity. So the environment was religious, but each person had varying degrees of religiosity. Does that make sense, or does that
That makes sense. We have in Australia, we've got a few like Catholic and non-denominational schools and that here, and the schools themselves are very religious. Like, you know, before every class they give a prayer and stuff like that. But then outside of school, they may not necessarily be religious. But then in Australia, most parents send their kids to private schools because they've got a better education.
Yeah, there is also that. But with this, I would disagree because it's a religious education curriculum. So I would not ever teach anything educational from a religious standpoint. It's completely unnecessary to do that. Unless you're just, studying the history of, well, not from a religious standpoint. I wouldn't even teach religious history from a religious standpoint because that's supposed to be objective. So
just a question. When you said it was an apostolic school, so did they? It is just because a friend of mine's been going through this on Twitter, and I read a lot of this stuff when I was younger.
Sure.
So were they talking about the apostolic chain from Peter all the way down to, the present day Pope and the tradition of the apostles and okay, I was just curious.
No idea. Because that wasn't
when you say apostolic, that's what. Sorry, like when you say apostolic, that's what I'm thinking of. Like, there is an apostolic tradition in Catholicism, and I'm probably going to butcher this and get angry messages from Catholics. But
well, they should just correct you nicely.
But it is. Peter was the vicar of Christ, and through him, the office of the pontiff gained infallibility. The Pope in himself might be fallible because he's an imperfect human, but the office is infallible, and it's a chain all the way back to Peter from Christ.
Yeah,
and that's what gave the supremacy to the Catholic, like the pontiff and the Catholic Church and all that. So I was just like, so they didn't go into like any of that kind of teaching, or because I know there's a huge rift between the Baptists and the Catholics and the.
It was similar to the teaching that I grew up with. So I don't know anything about, to be honest with you, I left the Apostolic Church, or they moved us out when I was 12 years old, and I wasn't doing anything to observe it or learn anything about its doctrine. I just went to the school. And the objective of going to the school was to ensure that the education came from a biblical standpoint. It wasn't necessarily the doctrine of the Apostolic Church my parents were interested in, but the education coming from a biblical standpoint, which is not education.
I don't want to get I don't want to get wrapped. I don't want to get wrapped up in a theological debate here. It was just curiosity.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not well versed in that. I couldn't contribute to a lot to the I guess the details of the apostolic denomination or even the various sects of that denomination. But eventually I'll probably hit it. Right now I'm reading more about the origins of religious thought and hierarchy and stuff like that.
Question. So coming from your background, what's your perspective on like Islam in general?
Don't hold back.
No, I will hold back. I knew this question was coming. Let's
expand on it a little bit more. Growing up, what were you taught about Islam?
Oh, that they're wrong. I mean, point blank. And my mother said this even like 2 days ago, so it's the same message.
All right, I guess we can wrap it up now.
No, because I've got a coworker of mine, and she says I was raised atheist, but then I found the love of God, and now she's like born again. And we were in the office one day. She knows that I'm an ex-Muslim. She knows that I was raised Muslim and I left the religion. And she knows I'm an atheist, and she knows I'm very much like, shut the fuck up, stop talking about Jesus to me.
And good for you on being an atheist.
Yeah. And she's like, she was like, oh, but Muslims are wrong, so we can't even bring them into this conversation. I was like, sweetheart, please. She's
Well,
wrong.
she's wrong
She's
too.
wrong. yeah, it's like, you're wrong too, honey. She's like, no, but like, and then she's went. So actually, this is where I actually wanted to ask, because again, I don't really speak to Christians at all, because like my partner's family, they don't really speak English, so I can't really get into a philosophical debate with them. So so she was telling me that she was taught that in her church where she goes to, that JC told her that teaches that the Jews were the original people, and they're the God's chosen ones, and that the Christians and the Muslims are, like, everyone who's not a Jew, like the Christians and the Muslims are the, like, second in line. It's Jews, that's Christians, and it's Muslims, but like, we're not as chosen by God, so we need to sorry, I'm just like paraphrasing what she said, and we need to do more to get into God's favor. Is that kind of something you were taught, or is this kind of some new ass weird thing that first time you're hearing about?
That's the first thing I've heard of that perspective. The perspective that I've been presented with, and I would say my mother's perspective, and that the perspective of most people that I've spoken to regarding this, is that Islam does not conclude that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He's merely a prophet, and the attention is given to Muhammad, and that's wrong.
Yeah.
So that's the objection.
Okay.
But I mean, okay, yeah, like Christ is not given any divinity whatsoever.
Right.
But you do have in Islam as well that the day of judgment and all that will not happen until Christ returns, right? So Christ will come back in Islam. There will be a second coming of Christ, and he will help fight the enemies of evil, but he'll fight on the side of the Muslims, right?
Right,
So
exactly.
They still do have that.
Well, it seems kind of like they're tugging kind of at him, and they want to fight over him, so... I mean, it doesn't really matter to me.
I don't think.
You're like,
I don't think it takes.
Y'all both crazy.
Yeah, because to me, even if he did exist, he's not divine, because we have no evidence of what people define divine as. So it's just an irrelevant topic. I mean, until someone can demonstrate the man even.
So you went to college, and you had obviously all the experiences, and then you realized that religion is, well, bullshit. How did you confront your parents, or did you kind of like sit there and like go over it in your head for a bit, or did you call up your parents and be like, why did you lie to me?
This was kind of a progressive process, like a process that progressed over time. My interaction with most of the religious conversations happened with my mother, and that's because she's the more outspoken religious person in my family. My father is more analytical, so he doesn't necessarily bring up, Jesus Christ is the Lord of our life. He's not just going to randomly say that. My mother is more likely to. I, while going through certain, questioning periods in my life, would hear her say things like this, and then say something that reflected my ideal at the time that would end up in an argument. For example, we're talking about something, and I'm, going through my Yoruba stage, or my Hindu stage, or my Buddhist stage, or my Deepak Chopra stage, whichever one, because there were a few. And I would say, I believe in reincarnation. And it would be said in kind of a spiteful, kind of silly way. I was younger, and she would say something like, "What? You only get one chance, honey," or something like that. And I'm like, "No, how do you know that? I believe that we get." I would say stuff like we would get in arguments, kind of like that. So over time, these arguments happen more and more, and they happen frequently. My dad told me one day, he was like, "I don't really care what you are, as long as it's not like Muslim." Or something like that. It was like, he's like, just like apostolic, Pentecostal, and he named things like that. Just believe in God or basically do something. And I'm like, okay, I don't really want to. So the conversation, because they're so religious, there's been a lot of opportunity for conversation is basically what I'm saying. So the conversation and me kind of coming out to them and revealing myself to them has happened gradually over time. And I did have a conversation with my mother a couple years ago. She invited me to go to Mother's Day with her, and she wanted to go to Creflo Dollar's church, which is where they attend. That's a mega church. And I have a big problem with mega churches because I feel they're exploitive, especially to African Americans who are already earning so much less. Statistically, it's a waste of money to feed this money to Creflo Dollar. He's asking for private jets and other things like that. And he's not really speaking any truth into their lives because the things he's preaching aren't based in truth, because none of the stories in the Bible have been demonstrated. Like Jesus's divinity has not been established, basically. So we had an argument about it, and I was basically explaining to her why she, asking her why she wanted me to believe like she did, and it came out that it was her belief and it's real for her, and she wants me to just believe. And that was upsetting and pissed me the hell off, because
Of course.
I've been told that this is real. And if you don't do this, you're not going to, there are certain problems and consequences that come along with neglecting this. And then all of a sudden I get to 32 years of age and we're having real conversations about this, because all of a sudden I'm not buying BS anymore. And it all comes down to, well, it was my belief. Well, I was raised this way, or I was in church at age 5 and it was comforting to me. And then your father and I got saved and we had all these friends and saw arms grow out and all this stuff, and it's just like, that's what you believe happened. Is there a possibility something else could have happened? Well, yeah, of course. But I was there. But there's no evidence. But my whole life was built on this. And it's frustrating, and it's still adamantly expressed today, their religious dedication. And it's frustrating to me because doing the research, I see that it's obviously not true. So now I'm just trying to find out why it's so important to them.
Yeah.
But if that answers your question, I mean, it's kind of a long story. It took a long time for me to come out to them as because, I told my mom and she was like, atheist, I knew you were questioning, but you just threw it all away. And she's like, most people believe in God. And I'm like, yeah, most people are wrong. And it kind of started like that, and it's still going on, unfortunately. But
talking about the because my coworker, she does tithe, where she gives like a certain percentage of her income to the church.
Tithing?
And I'm like, tithing, yes, sorry. Yeah. And when she told me about that, I was like, that's a waste of money. You could be like buying so much more stuff with that. We could saving up something. So is that something that your family do, or that that people do?
Yes. And one of the issues I had with them, so I have an issue. I don't necessarily have a problem with church attendance. It's hard to say it, because I think church attendance can be healthy because it provides communal interaction and social interaction, and it's fun. I'm going tomorrow morning, but the only reason I'm going is because we're not going to the mega church. So I don't have a problem with people necessarily tithing, because they're putting into their small little church where they need to keep the lights on. And I understand that. Yeah. But I have a problem with them tithing to someone like Creflo Dollar, because the man, was paying on his Bentley. And it's so if that makes sense, I try to give some flexibility. I can't say, don't tithe at all. People meet at churches and it's important to them. And these churches, and like my sister's church is tiny, little one room. That's where we're going. I have no problem with that. It's communal, it's close. They got to keep their lights on and got to keep the air conditioning on. Yeah. And they're trying to pay for the kids to go to Washington, D.C. and they're doing things. So I don't really have a problem with it from that standpoint. But the Joel Osteens and the Kenneth Copelands.
Yeah. Also, like,
come on. Oh, come on. Creflo needs another jet. How can you deny him another jet?
He doesn't need another jet. So disappointing.
Yeah. Also, there's to consider. There's a factor that, like, at least in Islam, some people give way more than they can afford to. Really.
Exactly.
Because like, I don't know if you have this in Christianity, but in Islam, there's this concept that if you give money into a mosque or an Islamic initiative, the money will come back to you.
Yes.
And people think that by giving money, they're actually going to get wealthier. My father like gave away his his super. I don't know if you have this. It's essentially like his retirement fund.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, he gave away his entire retirement fund recently to a mosque. It was like over like. Yeah, it was like a serious amount of money.
Is he going to live there?
In the mosque?
Well,
yeah. Because if you give away money, I expect you're going to live there, or they're going to feed you, or they're going to clothe you, or they're going to provide you with medicine or some kind of benefit, because that's pointless.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
There's
but
also
in his mind, like...
Yeah. There's also this concept in Islam. I don't know, again, if it's the same in Christianity, where
No.
if
I
you,
was just gonna say, yeah, he thinks he's gonna get it back.
yeah.
No,
And there's also this other concept of if you give towards something like a school or a mosque, something with Islamic things, that even after you die, you will still get continuous good deeds for doing something like that. Yeah, so there's this theory that, if you build a well in a Muslim country and people use that for long after you die, you're still going to get these good deeds for it. Is there anything like that in like Christianity?
The similar thing to that, I would say, is of course kind of like well, it depends on what school of Christianity you subscribe to. There's one school that states that, you can't come to God based on good works. It's really based on faith in Jesus. Another one says that it's based on faith and good works. I'd say in the case of the second, view of Christianity that says works are important, that they would think that would benefit them as far as getting into some type of eternal reward. But that's not common.
But
I mean,
okay,
it is common. I'm
reward,
sorry, it is common. It's not everybody. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Obaid.
But like the thing with the eternal reward, and also with the prayers for the Muslim things, like my uncle's doing a thing in Pakistan now where you get wells dug in remote communities, and you can do it in the name of someone who's passed away. So my brother passed away a couple of years ago, and we had one. My mother wanted to have one built in my brother's name, so we did that. And that's thank you. But yeah, so it's that whole thing was, so the people would pray continuously. Every time they did a prayer, they would include the name of the person who the name of the person who you dug the well for, so that person would get blessings in heaven. But in Christianity, especially Catholicism, if you go back a few hundred years, you had indulgences. And Ratzenberger, I think, reinstated something along the lines of indulgences, which was if you gave money to the church in the name of a loved one, that would guarantee them in heaven. And if you gave enough money, the angels would eternally pray for them in heaven, so they would have a more restful sleep, and they would have a more pleasant stay in heaven, or they would go to a higher level of heaven. So you had a specific thing of how much you give dictates where you go into afterlife. And then, I mean, the whole thing too, like with in the States. But you have the thing in the States now too, where it's like a lot of the evangelicals, like people like Creflo Dollar, like send me $100 and God will give it back to you, and I'll send you some water that you can sprinkle on something to make you wealthy, and like all this kind of stuff, right? Like
I've seen that.
Like the
holy water
thing.
Yes. That is a common theme, and one of the reasons I had an argument with my mother about going to his church was that I tried to go to his church the year before. For Mother's Day, I went, and it wasn't him that did the message, it was his wife. And the message still was the same. Sow into the Spirit so you can reap in real life. Sow into the Spirit, basically give your money to us so you can reap something else undetermined, a parking space, a raise, a mate in the future. And when God's timing is right, he will deliver this thing to you. And don't press God. Just know that if you're diligent and sowing in the Spirit, because remember, what you reap, you sow. Sow in the Spirit consistently, and God will see your commitment to him, and he will reward you for that. Hallelujah. And that was really angering to me. And it was so angering to me. And my ex, well, I wish he wasn't my ex, but anyway, my ex and I are sitting there, and he's like, this is some bullshit. Like, he's like, people are actually like packing money, and there's like, it's like a coliseum of people. And I'm like, I just feel like they're doing so much to manipulate them, and it's very upsetting. People need their resources. And people need to give resources to things that will not only that benefit others, but also benefit them as well. There are so many other people who could use that money, and at least on honest terms. And so it's just disappointing.
How do you, like, say, okay, so you're obviously, you're on Twitter, you've got your pretty face on there, and you've got something like what, just 30,000 followers. Have you had instances where you've been recognized in public by, like, say, Christians, for example, and they've come up to you and tried, like, arguing with you or trying to convince you to come back to the straight path?
No, but I have I heard an instance of somebody who followed me, who was on the subway, and they were on my profile, and someone said, "Oh, I hate that bitch," and like that was kind of cool. But no, thankfully, and this is one of the reasons I've been hesitant to kind of be as a little more outspoken, even though I'm kind of easing into that now, is that I am not well known, really. So it's, it's just kind of it's no, but I do ask people questions when they say things about religion, and I hear it a lot because of where I work and where I live. And if somebody says something like, "Well, Jesus is going to do this for me," I'm going to ask them like, "What does that mean? Like, are you saying like what does that mean?"
Yeah. I'm finding like with like my coworker, for example, because she's like a baby Jew, baby Jew. She's a baby Christian. She's a baby Christian, and she's really into her Jesus-y stuff, and so like I'll be like, "Oh, I've got a headache," and she'll come up to me and touch me on the head and be like, "By the power of Jesus, cure you," and I'm just like,
"Oh my god, seriously."
I'm don't like, "Oh God!" So
don't
like,
touch me.
You should fake as though you're like it worked.
No, you should like fall down on the ground and pretend you're seizing, and then she'll never touch you again.
Well, yeah, so,
she'll terrify her.
I work in management, and I work in management, and she's a manager of a different department, and she comes up to us and she's like, "Oh, guys," it was me and a few other co-workers, and she's like, "Guys, I really need you to pray. Like, I found out the reason why we haven't been, hitting our targets is because I haven't been as focused on Jesus. I'm going to bring Jesus back into my life, and we're going to be focused, and we're going to start hitting our targets." She's like, "So I need you guys to pray for me." And so I'm sarcastic, like, "Oh, I'll pray to the gods of sales." And this other coworker goes, "Oh, I'm an atheist. I don't pray." And this other one, and I was in hysterics. I couldn't stop laughing. He goes, "I'll pray to Satan for you. He'll probably answer before God does." The horror on her face.
I would have loved to have seen a picture of that. People say ridiculous things.
Yeah. So how would you like? Sorry. What would your advice be to, especially like maybe younger atheists or newer atheists who are having to kind of do that thing where they want to explode and tell everybody about all this wisdom they've found and their atheism and how they've got all the answers? And how would you maybe, obviously you perhaps might have more experience in this, but how would you recommend that they respond to situations like that?
This is a hard thing to do. But I first gauge where you are and who's saying it. It's very fun to challenge people, but you always have to be cognizant of your environment. But, be it that it's appropriate, I would just ask almost like you're curious about any general thing. Like, can you just kind of tell me what you mean by that and help me understand it? Because I've heard it before, but it means different things to different people. And I want to help, but I just don't understand like how that would help, or just ask generally and kindly, like, what do you mean?
That's one of the things I don't want to make light of anything here. Like if you're in the Middle East, let's say you're in Saudi and then you're in Tennessee, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Saudi, if you're openly, if you're like, "Yeah, I'm an atheist, Islam sucks," you're getting beheaded or imprisoned, right?
I was going to say you wouldn't do that, right?
No, you wouldn't. No, but like I'm saying, if someone did that, that's that. You know what the reaction is going to be. So,
right.
You don't have to kind of think about those kind of conversations because you know not to have them.
Right.
Whereas, let's say you are in Tennessee, you're in the States, you're in America, free speech, freedom of expression, whatever. The person you're speaking to might, at that moment, not say anything out of politeness or whatever. But then after the fact, go and report you for something or other. And so and I don't want to, like I said, I'm not trying to make people are going to say, "Oh, well, how can you say it's not worse than, it's worse than Saudi Arabia or whatever." In the sense of, in the States, you're free to talk about it, but you don't know what that person's going to do afterwards. Gives it a little bit more ambiguity as to whether or not you're free to speak, as opposed to in Saudi Arabia, you're not free to speak. It's very clear there. Where in the States, it's kind of ambiguous what you can say and what you can't. That leads to, losing your job or losing standing in the community or something like that.
Yeah. Well, Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Dean. You haven't said much, hon.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, that kind of approach reminds me of I don't know if you've heard of street epistemology.
Yeah, I love Anthony.
Yeah, Anthony. Yeah,
he's a personal friend. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
well, I've watched a couple
sweet.
of his videos, especially when I first became an atheist. I watched a bunch of his videos. And I think that they really helped me with talking to my family and talking to like religious Muslims about religion, because instead of attacking them or straight up stating what I believe, you start to question their reasons for believing in what they do, and they start, and you can see the sort of questions appear in their head as well, because like you'll be like, have you really ever changed your mind about anything in your life? Like they'll start to figure it out on their own, I feel like, in that way. So I think you're talking about how Obaid was talking about how in Saudi Arabia or something, you can't talk about these things, but you can sort of ask those types of questions in most environments. You can sort of ask people why they believe in things, just out of curiosity.
Yes, it has to be presumably innocuous. When you ask questions, you literally have to come off as innocent as possible and as curious as possible. Almost like you're just coming to them with a white flag and saying, I am so sorry, please don't see me as rude, but I've heard people say this before. Can you just help me understand what you mean by it? And if you ask that, more than likely they're going to respond in a positive way. Now, the goal is to maintain that attitude and maintain that
neutrality.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's going to be hard to do because this is an emotional subject and we've all been affected by it to the point where we're coming together and doing something like this. So I'd say for those who are similar to us and with religion, it's typically an emotional thing that's very difficult to change and really affects you. When you're asking questions about it, try to curb your emotion, because the second that comes out, everything can fall apart and they are going to respond accordingly and it's all just going to fall apart. But it's possible to have conversations about these things. It is very possible to have cordial, kind conversations, and that's the goal that I try to say on Twitter. People don't have to be assholes. They choose to be assholes, but they don't have to be.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but Ramadan is coming up in like a couple of days.
Oh.
I'm aware.
Yeah, my family.
I don't have to do any of that.
You're like, this Ramadan, you're going to go to the mosque, you're going to pray, you're going to go for the Tarawih prayers. I'm like, sure.
Do you live with your family?
Yeah. And I live right next door to a mosque. Oh,
yeah. It's a little different when you live with someone that's a bit different, especially if they're providing for you. If they're affecting your livelihood, it's, grinning and bearing it, but having an outlet like Twitter or something else where you can just kind of get rid of those feelings you have is really helpful.
Yeah.
It is very helpful. So I myself am open in real life. I left home at 19 and I did the whole thing, fuck you and fuck you God kind of shit. And I don't recommend you do that, especially if you have nowhere to live, nowhere to go, and no money. I don't recommend it. But yeah, so that's kind of why, we wanted to start Heretics Corner, is because we understand that it doesn't matter if you're from a Christian background, a Jewish background, a Hindu background, a Muslim background. Because like you said yourself, like you grew up in a very strict evangelical family. And if you had gone through this at, say, 14, 15, you would have needed an outlet, and there probably wouldn't have been one that existed at that time. So that's why I think you speaking up and all of us speaking up is just doing something small to help other people, because the more people hear about stories of atheists or anyone leaving religion, and even if they go to join another religion, no, that's their own thing. But if they find that it can be done and they can be successful and they can survive every single day, I think it's inspiring. That's why I'm a very firm believer of everyone's journey to apostasy or throughout life is uniquely their own. No one's is better or worse. It's everyone goes through things in their own way, and everyone should be able to tell their story.
Exactly. I agree with that. And I really want to help more people who are making the journey, because I do understand how it is, especially coming from a religious family where you don't feel comfortable really expressing who you are in the midst of them expressing who they are. And people should be able to be who they are freely and proudly and without guilt or shame or fear. And feeling guilty or guilt or shame or fear over not believing in a God is just ridiculous. And nobody should make you feel that way. That's almost like making someone feel guilty for not believing in something like the Easter Bunny. You don't believe in that? That's ridiculous. The only reason that people are worried about it is because most people believe in the Easter Bunny. And as ridiculous as the Easter Bunny is, if most people start to believe in it, you're going to start questioning whether or not you should as well. And, those who are honest with themselves can admit that it's bullshit and sacrifice the social cohesion and and are going to break out on their own and find a new social group. And that's hard to do, but it can be done.
Just like from your aspect, like you sound like you have a pretty good relationship with your family now.
Yes, I do.
When you first became atheist, was it strained? Like, were you shunned? Were you like,
no?
What was the reaction from them?
Nothing. Nothing really changed. I mean, I've always kind of been, I don't like the word rebellious, black sheep. So, because they'll agree with the word rebellious, but it's good to rebel against bad ideas. And I'll tell them that their ideas are bad. And I used to not feel comfortable doing that. I still love and respect my parents. They're my freaking parents. But I am very comfortable telling them that these ideas were bad and harmful. And you need to reconsider them. And they know that, and that's fine. And they're comfortable telling me, well, we thought we were doing the best at that time, and we still think we are okay. But no, we're able to have those conversations, and to us, family is more important. My family is much more important than religion. They are the closest people to me. We don't see each other all that much, but we live close together. We're seeing each other tomorrow. We get along great when we are together, and that's what's important to me. And if I need them or they need me, we're available. So
exactly. I think that's something what you just touched on there is family should be more important than what you believe in. It
absolutely
should be.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And
it should be.
I touched on this when I recently gave a speech, and I said for some people religion matters more than family.
Yes.
But it shouldn't, because at the end of the day, in this life, even if you believe in an afterlife, in this life, your family are going to be the only ones that have your back. They're the only ones that are going to stand up for you and support you and help you through things. And if you let something as a belief in a fairy or a god or an alien or whatever you believe in come in the way of that, then you're losing that connection.
You fucked up if you do that.
Yeah.
You fucked up.
I was trying to be a bit more polite. I swear too much. But yeah, it's and we're animals, and we need that connection with family. We're not loners. We have not been built to be alone. We need those connections. So whether you make those connections with your family, and if you can't make those connections with your family, you should always try and endeavor to make connections with other people. Always trying to make connections. Otherwise, you're going to be very sad and lonely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
that's not fun.
No.
Yeah. I think family can be this grounding force for throughout your life. Like
oh yeah.
Like I spend a couple of days away from my family, and I start to miss them like so much.
Yeah.
That's cute.
Just to make sure you don't.
Sorry?
Just to make sure you don't worry. I was just going to say, just to make sure Nikki doesn't worry too much We will edit out your profanity so your family doesn't think any less of you.
Are you serious? I would love for them. Oh, that's so funny. No.
So I was gonna say, I think that might be part of the whole religious thing as well, because when you see the connection people have with God, it is often even just straight out described as like, a father-child relationship, and that's kind of what God is. From the time you're a child, people sort of subconsciously have this role model of like Jesus or Muhammad or whatever, and they're the sort of epitomization, anthropomorph. Sorry, I can't pronounce it. The human form of God.
Anthropomorphization.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Abrahamic faiths, and then I don't want to say look at the Eastern faiths, but look at Hinduism and Buddhism, right? So the Abrahamic faiths, Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden. They were innocent until they ate of the tree of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, right? So they found out what good and evil were. They lost that innocence, so they were no longer childlike. And so that's why they were kicked out of paradise. To get back into paradise, you have to get rid of all that sin and become more innocent. Buddhism and Hinduism, to gain enlightenment, you have to have they describe it almost as a childlike innocence. So you don't see good or bad, you just see the action. Like I drank some water, not I drank water because I was thirsty. I just drank water. That's just the action, right? You don't look at good or evil. So it is getting back to a childlike state. So you want a father or a father figure or a parent figure to look after you, to make you feel good and protect you and punish you when you were bad. Like it's basically what it is. It's like a one big giant fucking daddy.
He's a sky daddy.
Yeah, or just a everywhere daddy, which is creepy. I think I can't remember. Yeah, that's a very popular view. I think one thing that could be considered is that you're a child up until society basically says you're not, and up until that point you're used to having kind of overseers and who are always kind of looking out for your best interest. The world's kind of scary, but for the most part they're controlling it for you, so there's not a lot of chaos or chance that could throw you off. But most people tend to revisit the concept of God around the time they become independent. A lot of testimonies I've watched online have a lot of people saying when they first, they got a little older, they were raised in church, they didn't really succumb to the ideas, or they were just there because their families wanted them to be. Then they got a little older and they experienced something negative, basically seeing how life can go negatively beyond their control, beyond their parents' control. And at that point in time, they saw their need for God. Which is, I basically am saying that when you start to become more independent, God may ideologically kind of fill that role that your parents did for you in the past. That's a pattern I've seen. It may or may not be demonstrable, but
well, yeah.
I wonder if that's my brother.
Woo.
Like my brother-in-law, my brother-in-law was born Catholic. Then his
He
family
born
became
Catholic?
born again. Yeah, then his family became born again. Well, whatever. Okay, he's born into a Catholic family.
I'm messing with you, Obaid.
Yeah. But then his family became born again. Then he became an atheist. And then when he married my sister, he converted to Islam, and he's pretty fundamentalist right now. But I'm wondering if he's one of those people, like you were saying. Like I said something similar to that. Like he needed something. Like in Pascal's Wager, Pascal talks about those who are so created that they cannot believe, right? So like, that even for them, they should believe in something because of this, right? Because of his wager. But if you look at the other side of that, like, so if Pascal says those who were so made that they cannot believe, there might be people that were so made that they have no choice but to believe. And I keep using Francis Collins as an example of that, because Francis Collins, he led the Human Genome Project, saw a waterfall and frozen in 3 parts, and gave himself to Christ right then and there, right?
I wonder what he was going through at that time.
Yeah. So, I'm just wondering, like, do you see something like that, or do you think of something like that? Like, there are people who have no choice, but they have to believe, like whether it's in God
No.
or it's in The Secret or it's in Bigfoot.
No, I believe there's a commonality that we all have, and that's that we are human beings, and human beings have the ability to learn from their environment by obtaining information, evaluating it, and forming conclusions. And we're able to do that about most things. All of us are, but to a certain point, we're not. So at that point, there's kind of this void. And we know that that void is part of our lives, but we don't necessarily know how to control it, if that makes sense. We know that the bad is out there with the good. We know that every time we wake up in the morning, something crazy can happen. That's something, but we don't want that to happen. We just know that we can't control everything. So we each have our own ways of doing this, and religion is the way for us to do that. It's a way for us to add structure to a world that's chaotic and fearful. People do that in different ways, and people do it in basically based on how much they know. What I understand about the world, what I understand is that people who tend to be less knowledgeable in general tend to be more religious. People who tend to be more knowledgeable tend to be less religious, generally. But The Secret and religion and all of those things are just a reflection of our attempts to control the world. I mean, you're making a vision board by cutting out magazine papers, in hopes of like marrying like Harrison Ford. I mean, I remember on my vision board I had Nicki Minaj, who she's a bad bitch, and I love her. And I want to be like her, plus Oprah. And at the time, I was thinking like Dr. It was a Deepak. That was the Deepak Chopra phase, if you can't tell. But like I had like 370Z diamond ring, find your perfect mate, and then I wanted to own a Nissan dealership. I don't know. Like I put all that on my vision board, and thought the universe was just gonna. That was my way of controlling the universe. I do this, and the Nissan dealership's gonna fall into my lap along with a man and a 370Z. Obviously.
See, I agree with that whole statement of religion gives people structure, because so my mum converted to Islam, and that's how I ended up here as a Muslim. And so, but she was raised as an Irish Catholic, like that's how she was, like very strict Catholic. And then she has a Jewish grandmother on her father's side, but we don't talk about them because they're the dirty secret. There's a dirty secret when you become Muslim to have Jewish relatives.
I've never thought about that before, ever.
And so then, she went through phases. So she was raised as a Catholic, then she became a Pentecostal, then she left religion, then she became born again, and then she became Muslim. And so a lot of people are like, wow, that's a lot of religions to go through. And I've always had this theory when people ask me, oh, why did your mum become Muslim? And if you ask her, she says, oh, Islam made more sense to me than Christianity or Judaism. And in my mind, I'm like, no, Islam gave you a reason, because everyone has a personality type. We have sociopaths, psychopaths, and different types of personalities all throughout the world. And I sincerely believe, I believe that Islam gave my mum the answers to live the life justified in her view of what she wanted life to be like. So she wanted to be in a world where she didn't have to answer to anything because she's a woman. And as a Muslim woman, you don't really have to answer to anything. You just have to obey, you know? And then,
that's horrible.
I feel like that's part of why. And also it gave her a reason to be very judgmental towards other people. She's a very, 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 very strict Muslim. And so I think religion does give people that. So that's why when someone says to me they want to follow a religion because they like the religion, I'm like, okay, whatever, that's fine. It's up to you, whatever. You want to take your good bits, that's fine. It's more along the lines of when they give all that ownership of over every single action that they do and every single bad thing, and they don't take any accountability for anything that they do, and they put it all in God's basket and be like, well, God will deal with it. That's where my problem with religion comes in, where they no longer have ownership over their lives and their destiny and their fate, or whatever you want to call it. Would you say something similar?
Yes, I would. Well, religion is interesting. I'm really trying to understand it a lot better, because it's such a huge part of all of our lives, whether we want it to be or not. So, and it affects my life dramatically. So I'm trying to understand it. But I would say that I feel like the assessment might be a little, I don't know your mother.
Oh,
But
I hate religion. Let me just put that. I hate religion, but I'm like, I'm too tired to get into arguments with religious people every day of my life.
I don't think arguing. I don't really think arguing is the goal. Like I want to have conversations because these are important topics, extremely important topics. They are life-changing topics. They are topics that we all have to basically talk about and deal with. So I think it's good to talk about them. I don't want to argue with people about it, but I want to understand what religion provides for them that motivates them to behave the way they are. Like, what about your mom? Because you say it's judgmental or judgment. I would say, I don't know her, but I'm almost positive there's something more profound going on there that Islam allows her to express that maybe she wasn't able to find on her own. But I don't know.
Yeah, I was just gonna say my mom's a convert as well, and she had like a very similar, like kind of thing where she converted to like Judaism and a bunch of other things, and but that was because of her father. Her father was like trying out all these other religions, and he basically dragged the family along to convert to all these different religions, and they ended up converting back to Catholicism anyway.
Oh, wow.
And when they did that, my mom was like, "No, I'm staying Muslim because it makes sense to me." And
That's so interesting.
to her, like it became her entire personality after that. Like, she started wearing the hijab, and she got married to my dad eventually. Raised the kids as like conservative Muslims in Saudi Arabia after being a Catholic.
Oh my.
So and for her, it's always been about like I guess she genuinely believes it. Like it convinced her at a young age, if that makes sense. That's what I think it was. She got very convinced with the ideology. To her, it's like a science 2.0. It's the science of like
Religion
the laws of
has
the universe.
nothing. Religion has nothing to do with science, and it shouldn't.
Yeah, well,
I don't
to her,
understand.
it's kind of like the whereas science is about the laws of the universe, religion is about what caused the laws of the universe. So,
sorry,
and like to me that like that's all theoretical. It and it doesn't make sense. But like, I genuinely think that that's what motivates her, is that she thinks it is the underlying truth to everything.
I wonder why she chose.
Okay, like what you were saying about like the religion is describing how the laws of the universe work. I had a discussion with Armin on Atheist Republic about this, and like the way I started off with him on this was, if you look at religion and if you just look at the Abrahamic faiths, God told Adam and Eve the story of creation. Like the science part of it, like I'm not saying it is scientific or it's got any basis in fact, right? But the science part of religion was, I created everything in 6 days. On the seventh day, I rested. I did all this. The science part was solved. The knowledge that was denied to them was the knowledge of good and evil, was the knowledge of philosophy, and was the knowledge of thought, and was the knowledge of, not the knowledge of thinking, but like knowledge of critical thinking, like how to think, right? That's the knowledge that was denied them, not the knowledge of how it was created and what it was done, because God was boasting about it. Like, you have to worship me because look how great I am. I made all this for you, right? So that knowledge wasn't hidden. It was the other knowledge that was hidden. I don't know if I'm explaining myself correctly, or if I'm making any sense. Or
you mean like the spiritual knowledge wasn't hidden, or like
no, the spiritual knowledge was that was what was hidden. The knowledge of
okay.
creation, the knowledge of science per se. God was telling you, I created everything. Worship me because I made everything. This was all done by me. That's why you have to worship me. But the philosophical knowledge, the knowledge of the spirit, the knowledge of good and evil, that's the knowledge that was denied. That's the knowledge they were kicked out of. So religion, whether or not, like, obviously we all agree that the science and religion is wrong. It wasn't the whole 7 days and all that BS. But the knowledge that was denied religious people per se, like the knowledge that was implicitly denied, was the knowledge of good and evil. You know, like that was like the knowledge of science or whatever. It's not that it was denied them; it was the ability to think about that knowledge was denied them, not what that knowledge was. Like I said, I don't know if I'm
coming
clear
back
on
to
that.
the point. I guess what I meant was that what motivates a lot of people to believe in faith, or at least what sort of one of the factors is that, you know, everyone has these thoughts. Everyone wonders, like, how is it that human beings are, like, you know, the only species with like the kind of intelligence that we see as normal, and then what's the purpose of that, and you know, like, how does thought arise? All these questions, they're so difficult to answer. And then, like, questions like, how did the universe begin? All those questions are so difficult to answer that, like, and some people are just not satisfied with not having an answer. So I guess it kind of comes down to the whole God of the gaps thing. At least I think that's the main religious argument at the end of the day.
Yeah,
When they're not using
I
emotions
think it,
and weird spiritual arguments that make no sense.
Yeah, interesting.
oh, Nikki's muted herself, so we can, I guess, go on talking for a little bit until she gets back. So,
Yeah. So
yeah, but I mean,
Ramadan's coming up.
like the God of the Gaps thing. The God of the Gaps thing. That's one thing. That's Neil deGrasse Tyson did a good quote on that. It's like, as
Ever receding
for the God of
pocket
the
of
Gap.
ignorance.
Yeah, exactly. But as our area of knowledge increases, our perimeter of ignorance also increases, right? So when we didn't know about dark matter, we didn't even know what questions to ask about it. So we were a little bit more secure in what we thought we knew. But once we knew about that, we knew a little bit more, but then that area grew, but then the perimeter around that area grew as well. So there's a lot more stuff we're ignorant about.
Yes.
And you can always use religion to, You can always use religion to fill in that gap.
Who said the wise man understands that he knows nothing at all? I can't remember.
That sounds like part of Anselm's ontological argument for existence of God.
I think it was stated by a philosopher before that position was developed. But
no, but okay, but like, just hold on a second. I'll pull it up. Keep talking. I'll just pull it up.
Sure. And I'll turn my camera on here in a second again. But basically, I'm basically noticing that myself. The more I learn, the more questions I have. It's actually kind of overwhelming because there are so many different questions to answer. And I guess it's helped me understand maybe why people have adopted the God answer as a catch-all, because it's just so much easier. Yeah, and no one's gonna, I mean, this is a hobby for me. It really is. And it's something I'm interested in, but I have to put in work to read and study and learn. And these people aren't going to do that. I mean, most people aren't. They've got kids and family and life and soccer practice and driving school. And why did I say driving school? I don't know. I had driving school. We won't talk about why, but basically, right. So it would be nice to find ways to encourage people to learn more. So we could.
Okay, this is the argument that like, I think this is where the thing you're talking about comes from, and this is Saint Anselm's ontological argument. Even a fool, when he hears of a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, understands what he hears and what he understands in his understanding, and assuredly that then which nothing greater can be conceived cannot exist in the understanding alone. For suppose it exists in the understanding alone, then it can be conceived to exist in reality. Okay, you got to read the whole thing. A lot of this stuff, like, I read in university, and so that was 25 or plus years ago. So I've read Aquinas and I've read Augustine and I've read this stuff. So I remember listening to little bits and pieces of it. And if I'm going to be talking to someone, I might go back and read a little more. But like I said, like, it sounds bizarre, but it's basically saying, if you can conceive of, even a fool realizes that if there's something you can conceive of that is too great to be understood, then the fool understands that thing, then if it's conceived, it can be real, and that was his proof for God. It was like I said, you'd have to read it, and so that I think that saying that you said, even a fool understands the existence of God. I think it's derived from that.
Okay. I thought she was asking a different question, but yeah. Anyway. No, I thought she was talking about only a fool. Yeah. I can't remember what it was, but it was like about wisdom, wasn't it?
Hang on.
Yeah. So I was gonna say before, what I don't know, if you guys have any like, if Christians have any sort of fasting practices like similar to the Ramadan fasting, but yeah, would there be any comparison?
Different denominations do, but my family does. Creflo Dollar put my parents' church on this like month-long fast. My sister used to. So there's this passage in the Old Testament about two women who were seeking God on something that they had a question regarding, and they were on a threshing floor, I believe. And then my sister and her friends, or my sister would do something similar to that, where she would fast in some way when she was wanting wisdom on something. So yeah, there are similarities, but it's, I mean, yes.
I always looked at Lent, and I know it's not the same as Ramazan. I always looked at Lent as something similar to that, because I mean, with you'll have Jewish people fasting over Passover and things like that. You have Lent, where you give up something for 40 days, right? It's not really fasting, but you give up something you love for 40 days. And I do think some sects of Christianity around the time of Passover do fast as well, but could be way off about that. Like, I'd always equated that to something similar to Ramadan, but it's not really.
It's a different type of fasting as well, because Ramadan, Muslims have like dry fasting, which is like way more unhealthy as well, because we don't have any water when we fast.
That is not safe.
Yeah, like and
where
we were talking about this.
Where I live right now.
Yeah,
where I live, like, just for that, like, just to give you a perspective, by the time Ramadan is going to end around the 15th or 16th of June, by that time where I'm living will be 22 hours of daylight. Like right now we have about 20 hours of daylight.
Wow.
And so no eating or drinking in that time.
That's insane.
That's not healthy.
That's like
not healthy at all. Yeah.
And that goes for like kids as well, like like 12-year-olds and sometimes like 7-year-olds are like just going all day without water in the hot sun or freezing cold.
Why?
Really
that just sounds really stupid. But like,
and it lasts for 28 days. It's the month. Ramadan is the month that Muhammad got the Quran revealed to him, and it's to show you temperance and moderation and give you an appreciation of how the poor live. And during that, after the end of Ramadan, you have a big feast and you slaughter an animal, and you're supposed to give part of that animal to the poor. There is another feast a couple of months afterwards where they're commemorating Abraham's sacrifice, right? but after the end of Ramadan, you're supposed to have slaughtered an animal as well, feed the poor. If you miss any fast, there's a certain amount of money you're supposed to give to the mosques to feed poor people. So that's what Ramadan's all about, and it's to give you discipline and self-control and all this.
There are better ways to do that.
Hooey. What do you want?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but whatever. It's like
I think in a lot of Western countries, at least, I guess most places, during Ramadan, like, it's only during the day. So I guess a lot of adults especially have no problem with doing it because, like, I don't know, it's only like 12 hours or so you don't do it, and then during the night, at like sunset, you break your fast. And
wait a
usually
minute.
that, like,
are you saying people go 28 days without food and water?
No, it's
24
sunrise
hours
to
a-
sunset every. No, it's sunrise to sunset every day for 28 days.
Oh, that's what I was
So it's
thinking.
half a day in a
Right.
row. Yeah.
So what
Um,
you're saying, wouldn't that be normal?
Yeah, but it's okay.
Mm.
Let's say, okay, like where I live, it's an extreme. But even in Montreal, at this point, you have like sunrise at, let's say, 6
Oh,
in the morning
sure.
and sunset about seven at night. So you wake
Sure,
up.
sure.
You have to stop eating at sunrise. So you wake up about half an hour before sunrise to eat and drink.
Sure. Right.
Then you go the whole day until sunset without food
Yeah.
or drink.
Well,
And
that's
there's other
not
things
good.
too. You can't
Yeah.
smoke. You can't smoke. You can't have sex. You're not supposed to masturbate.
Oh,
there-
whoa, wait.
some people go as so far as to
28
not
days
chew
with
gum.
28 days with no
Yeah.
sex of any
Yeah,
kind
no.
with anything or anybody?
Yeah.
Well, because it's wrong. It's evil. But like
But
some
the
people
upside is-
will spit. Like some people won't swallow their saliva. Some people won't chew gum. It depends on the extent you take it to. Right? It's
When you look at
Yeah.
it from a health perspective, it's actually really, really detrimental. So I work in the fitness industry. And so what people do is, you know how fasting is becoming this new trend in the fitness world. But when I explain to people, it's no, you were fasting from sunrise to sunset. You do not drink. You still work. You still do everything during that time.
And then they
And
feast.
you're going, and
as
then they
well.
gorge on food at night. Like it's basically kind of in a sense like a form of an eating disorder, where they will then go to have dinner and they will eat so much food.
I
that
can't
then-
blame them. I mean, after a whole day without
Yeah.
eating.
No
And
joke.
so-
like the family spends like all day preparing food. That's how it is in my house anyway.
Yeah.
Like we get home from work and then like you spend the rest of the time preparing food for when you can eat it.
That's torture.
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
but I mean, okay. Like when I was a little kid, the first year I fasted, it was in Montreal. It was in July.
Ooh, you need
So
water.
it was fairly long days, probably 16 or 17-hour days, and I'm out playing with my friends all day long, and my parents are like, no, stay in the house, and I'm like, I'm a little kid, I want to go outside and play, running around. It was the end of the day, it was getting close to sunset, I was on my way home, but we just finished playing football, and I was super thirsty. I was in the park, and there was a water fountain. I went and drank from the water fountain, like just instantly reacting, like I was a 11 or 12-year-old kid. I wasn't really thinking about it. And as I'm drinking the water, I realized I'd broken my fast. I went home. I was in tears, and I went and ran into my room, locked myself in, crying like crazy. And I couldn't bring myself to tell my parents because I thought what I'd done was so wrong, and I was so racked with guilt over that. It was ridiculous. It was just...
That's sad. I mean, it's such it's a false idea that people are making decisions on in the real world. That's the problem. That is exactly the problem.
Yeah. To be honest, as an ex-Muslim, like I like to feast and I don't have to fast. But the downside is there's every night there's these prayers at the mosque. These like prayers that go on for like 3 hours.
Oh
And
God.
they are so tiring. And because people come to the mosque next door, a lot of the time they'll come into my room and they'll be like, "Oh, aren't you coming to prayers?" And they'll be like, "Oh, come on, bro, let's go." And they'll like drag me to it.
Why do they come into your room?
Like, cause like I live right next door to the mosque, so they come to my house for like to take ablution or like just talk to us, I guess. And like I can't hide anywhere. Do you know what I mean?
You can't hide.
It's every single night.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So it's a prayer. So basically, after your normal prayers, Muslims love praying, and would it be after your last prayer, which is called your Isha prayer? And in summer, it's brutal because it's about 9 o'clock at night, and then after that, people do it's. So if you've ever seen a Muslim pray, it's kind of this like weird up and down thing, and each up and down's like 5 or 10 minutes long.
Yeah.
But this one, they'll do it 20 times, up and down 20 times. But what some sheikhs or imams try to do is, so there's about 30 days in Ramadan.
When you say 20 times, it doesn't sound that much.
It doesn't.
Like someone on the outside.
Yeah.
No, it does sound like a lot. That's a lot.
So then
So
what they do, the Quran has 30 chapters, I guess you would say, or 30 sections in the Quran. So what they try to do is every single night they try to do one chapter of the Quran.
Oh.
Every single night. So that could be somewhere between
It
I don't
takes
know,
so long.
40 or 50
torture.
pages of the Quran every single night, and you're standing there
You're
for like
standing the whole
20
time.
minutes. And
You're
then these
standing the whole time. They can't
Oh,
even
yeah.
Like 90% of the time. Yeah.
Oh man, why did they have to make it so painful or unenjoyable?
And here's the thing. You can technically leave after like 8, but like everyone will like guilt you into like staying for the whole 20.
Oh sure,
Because,
of
like-
course, right. But the point is, like, why? I'm gonna have to. I need to make time to start reading the Quran because I haven't read it. And
There are also some nights. Sorry to interrupt you, but there are also some nights
fine.
where you pray and chant all night long.
Tahajjud.
And I worked overseas. I worked at the military, and I was in Afghanistan. And my first year in Afghanistan, I got there, and a lot of the guys knew I was ex-Muslim, and they started hearing from the loudspeakers of the mosques all these prayers come out, and some of them were getting really freaked out, and they thought like they were getting ready for an attack or something, and they're asking me like, "Are we going to get attacked? Like, what's going on?" They sound really angry. Like, what are they saying? Or like, do we have to worry about something? I explained to them what they were doing.
that is so. So they make these loud noise. They just chant.
Well, they're just praying and reciting the Quran over and over and over again, and they're just or reciting like several chapters, and they're putting it on the loudspeaker so everyone in the neighborhood can hear. And it was the NATO headquarters in Kabul was right in the center of Kabul. There were mosques all around, and so they would hear this chanting from different loudspeakers coming in, and it sounded angry, and they were just. It's all broken up. I mean, to me, it sounded like the teachers on the Peanuts. Like whenever you heard the adults on the Peanuts, So that's what I heard. But all these people who had never heard it, they thought that oh my God, it's they'd heard it like in the summer you get a lot of attacks, and this was in the summer, and you hear this guy. It sounds like he's angrily yelling in Arabic on a loudspeaker. So they were ready for an attack. They were like DEFCON 1. Like we're gonna get blown up right now.
Wow.
Well, I think would actually be really interesting for someone like you is if you do read the Quran, you'll see there's a lot of things that Muhammad has taken from Christianity. So a lot of people who've read the Quran and who've read the Bible will notice that these similarities. And just a fun fact is actually Muhammad's first wife's uncle was a Christian. So yes, he was. So and so like when you do read through the Quran, first thing, it doesn't make sense.
Well, it's a religious text. I don't expect it to make sense.
As in like for like 5 verses you'll be talking about how beautiful heaven is, and the next verse is about donkeys. So it doesn't make any sense.
I was going to say that too. It doesn't make any sense.
I'll send you this link. It's a really good video that this guy in Egypt had done, and he just got arrested recently. And whether
I've
he's
heard
out
of
or now, but he did this video called "What You Didn't Know About the Quran," and it's really, really well done, and it gives you a brief overview of the history and the changes in the language, and like the amount of times Jesus is mentioned, the amount of times Muhammad is mentioned in the Quran, and things like that. I think it's all in Arabic, so you have to turn on your captions, and he's got subtitles there. But I'll send you the link.
Yeah, thank you.
I think you'd find it interesting.
Resources. Yeah, I would definitely. I understand that Islam is growing, so I definitely expect to interact with it more and more down the road. So I need to start learning more about it. It's just where I am. It just doesn't come up a lot.
Get your niqab ready. Islam is growing.
I will go down fighting not to. I will go down fighting not to wear that.
Look, if you do go ahead, feel free to message any of us or myself. So I do have extensive Islamic knowledge. I studied Islam quite in depth. I understand all the different schools of thought. I understand the creed and the jurisprudence and all that.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you've ever got any questions, just hit me up. That's what I do. I'm very good at it. And if you ever need a pretty recitation of the Quran in Arabic, just let me know.
Okay. Do you do any writing or anything like that, or
I'm very, very slack. I'm trying to restructure my life at the moment and get my shit together.
I understand.
Have you ever heard of the masked Arab.
The masked Arab.
Yeah, he does some videos critiquing the Quran and things like that from an ex-Muslim perspective. There's a bunch of
There's a
critiques
heap
all
of
over.
us. We're very,
Yeah,
very
that's-
tiny, but there's
yeah.
a heap of us.
That is
But yeah,
so.
I mean, like I Nulli probably knows a lot more than I do when it comes to the jurisprudence and all that. But if you ever have any questions, same here. Feel free to ask. And if I don't know it, I'll point you in the direction of someone who does.
Thank you. I appreciate that because it's definitely. I definitely want to address it because I definitely see a lot of problems and they really upset me. But I feel like I'm not in a position to say anything yet because I don't understand it.
Yeah, I
So
will
the
warn
more
you
I-
that a lot of the Christian criticisms of Islam don't really stand up. Like they don't really make sense. Like from a Muslim perspective.
I wouldn't
they're very,
criticize Islam from a Christian perspective. I would criticize it from a humanist and logic. I mean, just an objective perspective, I guess.
I meant
it's not objective.
there's some websites out there that will give you all these criticisms of Islam, but there's plenty to criticize about Islam, but these websites don't really have good arguments. Like the arguments are just made up. Yeah.
There's one guy who comes to. One guy who comes to mind is David Wood. Now, David Wood does a lot of good stuff, but he is a Christian apologist. I think it's David Wood. I could be wrong. I know the last name is Wood, but
I know who you're talking
I'll find
about,
him for you as well. But he is a Christian apologist, and so he does have a bias. And I don't understand. Everyone has a bias, whatever. But like I said, his criticisms of Islam. No, but his criticisms of Islam, while they're not incorrect, there is a bias to push another belief system.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's why I don't. I told my mother the other day that she needs to do some genuine research on the study of evolution. And she asked me, "Do you know of any Christian or creation scientists?" And I said, "Mom, no." She's approaching it from that bias. So I had to explain to her, you need to look at it from an objective standpoint of what's actually true, what we observe. You can't come at it from a trying to poison the well again, basically.
Well, you could always give her Hitchens' critique of Mary Baker Eddy, which was she was a cure for insomnia. But
my mother is not gonna look. I told my mother about Jordan Peterson just as an attempt to move her away from Ray Comfort. Okay, Ray Comfort, then the Banana Man.
God. Yeah.
Okay, she likes him, and I'm like, no, Mom, Jordan Peterson. Let's baby step our way to at least a semi better representation of Christianity, and then we'll talk about the rest of it later. But goodness gracious!
Well, before we get into the rabbit hole of Peterson, we can start wrapping this up a little bit. So, if you have any last words, I know you said you might be working on some stuff. If you want to talk about that, where people can reach you. Any last words of advice, and then we can wrap this up.
I'm going to be starting blogging. I don't know. I don't think I'm very funny, and I'm so uncomfortable on camera, but I'm going to try to do something helpful for other people. Because I really, there are a lot of people who can benefit from it. So I will be starting blogging and vlogging and working with other people to get more information out to the atheist community, especially people who are new to atheism or struggling in their atheism, or people who are having some type of guilt regarding being atheist or looking for substitutes or understanding how to interpret the world now that they are an atheist. Because, people may have a lot of questions, just kind of about, how they ended up, why their families are a certain way. People have a lot of questions. So my goal is to kind of help answer them. So that's pretty much where I am right now. Right now, I'm still working. So I'm working on it. So Skeptic Nikki on Twitter.
That's good.
Yeah. I was going to say, give us your Twitter.
Skeptic Nikki.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us. It was a lot of fun. And I'm going to disagree with you vehemently about one thing. You are very funny.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I just try to be honest.
Well, thank you very, very much for coming on. It was a lot of fun.
Thank
And
you.
hopefully
Thanks
we
for
can do it
having me.
again.
Yeah, absolutely. I love podcasts. I
And
think they're fun. It's fun to talk about things.
As always, you guys can find us on all of our socials that will be linked down below. I am the Nullifidian. We have Obaid Omar here and the Red Murtad, as well as on Heretics Corner. If you want to share our story, please do not hesitate to contact us. We do have a blog, so if you aren't willing to come onto the show, we can always share your story that way. And that's pretty much it, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day, weekend, wherever you are. Bye.
See ya.
uh,